Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to Canadian Space Summit 2020. My name is Hussein Bukhari, and I am the External Relations Manager at Canadian Space Society, and I'll be your MC for the duration of the conference. The conference is divided up into 4 days, and it starts at 9 a.m. and will be ending at 12:30 with a networking session. The organizing team at the Canadian Space Society has put together a great conference for you to learn and catch up on all new things related to Canadians and the Canadian space industry. Our speakers are professionals in the space industry from all across Canada, tackling the global problems, and they're here to share their thoughts and stories. So we'll start this conference off, and we hope that you enjoy what we got in store for you. So today's outline, we'll start off with a list of opening remarks, CSS in review. We will talk in deep on a panel about Canada's role in lunar exploration and continue onwards towards the end. So without a further ado, I'd like to invite Ryan Anderson. Ryan is the current president of Canadian Space Society. Can everybody just use the chat function to make sure you guys can hear me? Excellent. So Ryan's the current president of Canadian Space Society. With CSS, Ryan has led 2 successful proposals for GAC, grown a volunteer base, and led successful summits in 2013, 2017, 2018, and 19. In his 14 years of experience, Ryan has worked on several satellite programs, include Telesat's LEO constellation, Cosmos SARSAT, PCW, Anik F2, Anik G1, Nimiq 6, Neosat, EarthCast, Optisar Constellation. Ryan is also the founder and president of Satellite Canada Innovation Network, which established a optical SATCOM consortium, the space support program to help Canadian space SMEs grow. And I'd like to bring on Ryan on the platform to give us a jump off on the conference. Ryan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hussein. Hussein downplays his involvement here. He's not just the MC. Hussein has been chairing the program and putting this conference together on a very, very, very tight schedule. I think we gave you the go-ahead sometime mid-September, maybe late September, Hussein. And you'll note that the schedule is a little lighter than previous years, and that was by design. But Hussein and his team has done a fantastic job of pulling something together in a very short time and on a platform that we've never used before. So we have not done a virtual conference before. There's bound to be some hiccups here and there. I think we've had a really good start. We've been testing things as much as we can. So if there's any hiccups, please, let us know in the chats or by emails, and we'll try and sort those out. So thank you, Hussein. So it has been quite a year. On one hand, it feels like it was yesterday that I was giving this similar address at the Summit 2019. On the other hand, it feels like that was about 10 years ago. I'm going to switch on my video so you folks can see. The year has been very different for me. If you haven't been on a telecon with me, this is my COVID flow. It's my experiment in trying something new while I'm on lockdown. I'm going to try and pop up a set of slides here, just so we can follow. Yeah. The clean cut is gone. We'll see if it pops back one day, but that the one? All right, do we get a slideshow out of that? All right. Okay. So thank you. As Hussein said, my name is Ryan Anderson. I have been around the CSS for about 10 years now, as Ottawa chapter chair, as Ottawa chapter treasurer, as vice president, and now as president for the past couple of years. Oh, I got presentation mode. Sorry. I will see if I can change that. There we go. We'll get all these hiccups out. Is that the presenter or the show?
So just in the display settings up there, Ryan, at the top, you can swap the view.
Swap presenter and slideshow. There we go. How's that? Do we have slideshow or presenter view?
Right now, you've still got the
How about
presenter
this?
view. Should change shortly.
Okay, we'll give it a sec. But as I said, for the past couple of years, I've been serving as the president of the Canadian Space Society, and we have had just a tremendous couple of years. And I will get into those in a little bit. First, I do want to talk a little bit about the thing that's on everybody's minds and should be every day for the last 256 days or so. For me, the whole COVID issue really started the last day of school that my kids attended, and we realized they weren't going back after the spring break of March 13th. Global pandemic has affected absolutely everybody on the planet. And I hope that the next slide's not too terrifying. Oh, you're still seeing my presenter mode? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, presenter
here's our
still
hiccups. On. Yeah. All right. What do we got? Screen 1, screen 2. That's presenter. How about that one?
There we go. Perfect.
There we go. All right. Success. Interesting. There were 4 different screens I could choose from, and I got the wrong one the first 3 times. Obviously, the COVID vaccine or the COVID virus has affected people from the lockdown to health issues to testing in fear to death. And the this graph here is what's keeping me up a little bit at night. Certainly that it's not very scientific, but to me, the slope of those cases in Canada in these last couple of weeks sure looks a lot steeper than it did in March. And it kind of feels like we're a lot less worried about it than we should be. So for all of you who have been affected, I'm thinking about you. I hope everybody on this call is thinking about this pandemic and how they can help and how they can help others. And I hope that we continue to be kind and thoughtful for everybody who's affected by this, by the health issues, by the mental health issues of being in lockdown, and also by the financial issues. There are people whose livelihoods are basically destroyed because of these lockdowns and issues going on. Please continue to be Canadian as you can and stick with the proposed recommendations. Wear your mask, keep away from people, attend your events like this via telecon for as long as we can until we get this thing licked and we get these vaccines out. So that's my my sober first thought. And partly the reason why we are obviously having a virtual conference this year. With the onset of COVID, we were just in the early stages of starting to put together the program for the summit this year. We managed to work it out with the Brook Street Hotel that we were intending to hold the event at. They allowed us to push off for a year, and we'll come back hopefully next year, if not the year after, and we'll we'll hopefully be able to get together again and do this all face to face and have the really good conversations and networking that we can do one-on-one when you're sitting around the coffee station. All right. As far as Canada in space, one of the big pieces of news for Canada this year is obviously the new CSA president. The first time a woman has been appointed in the role for full time, and I think that's a fantastic move. We had a chance to hear Lisa Campbell speak days after the announcement was made, so that was really great. Um, it it also marks obviously the end of Monsieur Sylvain Laporte's excellent tenure as CSA president. Sylvain was perhaps not as colorful as a Walt Natinchik or some of the astronauts, but I think that was something that the CSA needed to resettle after some of the very short tenured presidents. So really excited to have Lisa on board and see where we go with the CSA from there. In terms of announcements and stuff in the year, I always like the kind of business side of space. So one of the things I look at is the state of the Canadian space sector report. So the report for 2019 was released this year, which represents the facts and the figures of the 2018 fiscal year. And what the data shows in there is the Canadian space industry basically bringing in revenues about $5.7 billion. And that is reported as an annual growth rate of about 1.3%. To put that into perspective, the Bank of America has the global space revenues and industry growing at an annual growth rate over the past couple of years of 10.6%. So for all of us in Canada, we should know that our 1.3 is pretty severely lagging the rest of the world. And that's an important note to take as we go into this next year and try to think about what we can do as an ecosystem to try and bring those numbers up and grow our sector. The other really interesting thing that has been happening in space, we've heard the phrase new space or commercial space. That is really, pun intended, taking off. Last year, according to Space Capital or Space Angels investment, 2019 saw $5.8 billion in investment in space companies and space-related companies, really led by a big investment in SpaceX and investments in these big mega constellations. That number was boggling. I'm surprised I haven't seen more headlines on this, but I looked up the number today from Space Angels or Space Capital as they're now branded. The number to date, so the first 3 quarters of 2020, is $17.5 billion. Almost 3 times more money invested in space this year over last year, which was a record. That is just incredible. That is just a vast sum of money going into all sorts of companies. So the big mega SATCOM constellations that are in a real mature industry, a lot of investment in Earth observation, investment in space domain awareness, space situational awareness, investment in GPS or global positioning, and in exploration. There's significant investments going into companies like iSpace that are intending to explore and exploit the resources of the solar system. So very interesting times. A lot of obviously money, hopefully creating a lot of jobs and a lot of interesting missions for the space sector. Again, it's really up to Canada to try and carve out a bit more of that market share, which we are doing. And there are companies that are doing quite well, gaining investments, some of which you'll hear from this week. GHGSat is one that's on top of mind, having received, I think it's about a $30 million investment over the last few months. So I'll leave them to talk about their stuff, but it's certainly an interesting time where the utility of space and space missions is becoming much more commercial, and seeing some sort of value return on investments, rather than our old way of, the government has to pony up all the cash and force the benefits out. So very exciting times. Along with that last little bit of exploration, we have kind of the first steps. Canada signed on to the Artemis Accords. This is a US NASA-led initiative to gather the community, the space communities and space agencies, to build a framework on how we can operate, how we should operate and cooperate, in let's call it extra LEO type missions, missions particular to the moon. Um, the Artemis Accords include statements that the signatories have agreed to use as the framework for their operations and exploration of the moon and farther out. It deals with use of resources, preservation of the environment, cooperation, uh, communication, letting each of us know what we're doing. It's a really great step towards treaties and commercial and trying to get a very concrete standard and set of operations for exploration missions and for operating on the moon. If we're going to be doing these things in commercial ways, even at government levels, you need to know what everybody else is doing and how we're going to do it. You want to have that level playing field. You want to have a set of rules that everybody understands and can work by. So this is an excellent step for Canada, an excellent step for the signatories to start this initiative, and hopefully we'll see more countries get on board, and start to build out the framework of how we expand our operations farther and farther into the solar system. Another big news this year was Canada's contribution on OSIRIS-REx was put to the test. OSIRIS-REx was a mission that visited the comet, or the asteroid Bennu, and it actually touched down and picked up a sample. Canada's contribution is the OSIRIS-REx laser altimeter, a very high precision 3D mapping instrument that basically maps the contour and elevation and shape of the asteroid. Again, Canada's contribution, Canada's collaboration with NASA and other partners on this allows Canadian researchers to get access to the data, and maybe somebody can correct me here, but I'm hoping some of the sample as well. So here's an image of Bennu, pretty darn high resolution, pretty exciting that we can get this kind of detail on an asteroid that previously was just a blip of light on a screen. So super mission, super contribution from Canada, and excited to see what happens when that sample gets back. If you weren't aware, I had heard that the scooping mechanism on OSIRIS-REx had a malfunction on its way up. It went down, scooped up a bunch of the asteroid material, and actually scooped up too much. It couldn't close the lid, and the material was actually falling out as the satellite was traveling away from the asteroid, and they have managed to close that, so they're not losing stuff anymore. So that's very good news that the sample return mission should produce some results. So excited to see how that goes. Oh, sorry, I got my slides out of line here. One of the most exciting pieces of news was has a Canadian connection as well, as University of Toronto alumnus Sarah Seeger was part of the team that discovered this. There was a substance detected in the atmosphere of Venus called phosphenes. These phosphenes, as far as we know, are only produced by organic life, by life as we know it. We don't have any other way of, that we know that phosphines are produced naturally. So the discovery and confirmation of these in the atmosphere of Venus is a strong hope for discovering life, or the positive signs of. In the worst case, it's a brand new way of producing phosphines that we don't know about, which should at least lead to a better understanding of chemistry and natural processes. So one way or another, this is a really exciting discovery. It could be the most exciting discovery of our lifetime. We'll see. Um, in just a random fluke and coincidence, the ESA mission Bepi-Colombo was scheduled for a flyby shortly after the announcement of that discovery. So the discovery was September 14th of this year, and Bepi-Colombo was scheduled and did fly by Venus on October 15th. So on the left, you see kind of the Bepi-Colombo, the artist rendering. On the right, you have the image that Bepi-Colombo took of Venus on the 15th. I don't, as of this morning even, there wasn't any information as to whether the instruments on board Bepi-Colombo had confirmed or proved or done anything else in around the phosphine discovery or made any additional discoveries. But I'm hopeful that that data is just in processing, and they're making sure that they've got the right answer before they go public with it. So it also takes sometimes quite a lot of time to get data down, get it analyzed, get it sorted out, and figure out what it means. So I'm not too concerned that we haven't heard yet, but I'm hopeful we'll hear in the next little while. Whoop. There we go. So one of the other really big topics in space these days are these mega constellations for satellite communications. And if you're an amateur astronomer, you may really be lamenting the recent advent and proliferation of the Starlink satellites. So down on the bottom right is SpaceX's shot of their Starlink satellites ready to be deployed. These are really small satellites, microsatellites that are providing broadband connectivity. They have some 895 of them on orbit already. They have opened up what they call better than nothing beta test that is available in some parts in Canada. It's roughly about $600 for the terminal and $129 a month. And they say they're getting really good speeds out of it. So take that as you will. Sometimes there's a bit of a hype machine going on, but still exciting that one of these LEO constellations is actually in some sort of service right now, because we've been talking about them for a few years. So Starlink, if you've signed up for the beta, you may be getting a call or an email from them that you can actually pick up your terminal and start some services soon. The other big competitor to Starlink was OneWeb. OneWeb, as many may have predicted, went into Chapter 11 bankruptcy and remained there for quite some time, where they have now emerged. So the top left there is the OneWeb satellite. They've got 74 satellites on orbit right now. Most of them built in Toulouse in the Airbus plant there, but intended to be built in the OneWeb satellites facility in Florida. These the emergence from Chapter 11 is interesting because it relied heavily on the UK government. So we all know about Brexit and the UK leaving the European Union. That leaves the UK without access to a global positioning system of their own. So previously they had access to Galileo through the European Union and European Commission agreements. So now they're looking for their own solution, and this was one hope in purchasing part of OneWeb, is that they may be able to put a position, navigation, and timing instrument on board these satellites and use that as a UK GPS or a UK Galileo, so that they have that kind of capability domestically. So that's interesting. I I know the GPS satellites are really big and complex and expensive to build. OneWeb is kind of the other way. It's a really low cost, crank them out, volume type build. We'll see if they're able to develop a system or systems that can actually achieve what they want it to. Either way, you've got the UK government and a very large Indian conglomerate company, Bharti Enterprises, as the major shareholders, and they've dumped $1 billion of new money into that company. So that's significant. They're back on the board, so to speak. Let's go with Kuiper next. So top right is Amazon Blue Origin's Kuiper project. This is a really interesting scenario because the richest man on the planet has a ton of money to dump into making this successful, and he has done so far. So Jeff Bezos has put in about $1 billion a year for the last couple of years into Blue Origin and this Kuiper constellation. We don't have much in terms of what the capabilities and satellites look like yet, but I'm certainly keeping my eyes on this because it's nice to have that kind of a cash flow and not even need revenues to get started, which is quite a contrast to the other three up here that are really venture capital type risky investments, where they're borrowing money or getting investor money and hoping for returns, where Amazon is Amazon. They've got almost a tap for money these days. So the bottom left brings us back to Canada. Telesat is obviously Canada's satellite SATCOM operator, and they have had a LEO constellation on the books for quite some time. Actually, since I left them, that was my last project at Telesat when I was there. Was putting together that system that we see there. They have had some big announcements. The last year, they were awarded an $85 million SIF project to help part of the research and development and design efforts of that constellation. They've been engaging with Canadian companies and academics and small and medium enterprises in order to get all that done. The most recent announcement, and it is really a follow-on from a previous announcement, is that there was a $600 million promise to buy from the Canadian government. So the Canadian government has written an agreement with Telesat now that when the Telesat constellation goes up, the Canadian government will purchase $600 million worth of capacity from Telesat. That's a really significant step in terms of Telesat's development of the system. It lends a national level of confidence and sorry, what am I saying here? It lends the confidence that your national government is supporting your endeavors and will purchase the service once it's there. It gives them a backlog, which they can then take to lenders and say, here we actually have demand for the service. We have customers who are going to pay for this. So I expect to see some more developments out of Telesat and more announcements in the next little while. We've been waiting to hear who the winner is for building their satellites. So building their system out, they've been down to two main bidding teams, Airbus and Thales, for quite some time, over a year maybe. And now I think we're on the cusp of actually getting to hear who is the winner and who's going to build out that system with Telesat. Both Thales and Airbus have publicly pledged to put infrastructure and/or jobs in Canada. So that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that announcement and hearing what kind of investment and what kind of benefit that means to the Canadian space sector. certainly it'd be nice to have more Canadian space jobs. So that's kind of a rundown of the highlights as I saw them for Canadian space and maybe a bit of space in general. Certainly there were other interesting markers. The return to flight for the United States in terms of being able to carry crewed missions to the ISS is a huge step. The United States hasn't had the ability to bring crew to the International Space Station since the retirement of the shuttle many years ago. So the Falcon 9 and the Dragon that were able to bring Crew 1 safely up is a really exciting step for Canada too. The next Canadian astronaut is going to go up on a Falcon, so that's exciting. As far as the Canadian Space Society, we have had actually a tremendous year, and maybe a tremendous 2 years. The board in 2017, 2018 undertook a rather extensive strategic analysis of the Canadian Space Society, what we were doing, how we wanted to do it, what we wanted to achieve, and what it meant for the space sector. In the years in between, we have been working towards some of the following goals. So the 4 pillars that came out of that strategic initiative were inform, educate, engage, and shape. So the Canadian Space Society wants to be able to do each of these 4 things for Canadians. So inform, we want to inform our membership and the public about Canada's activities in space. And we do this through social media. We do this through a new podcast. We had previously done this through the newsletter. This might be one of the largest complaints we've had this year. A longtime volunteer and tireless volunteer, Glenn Strom, who I can never thank enough, decided it was time to retire from the newsletter this year, and we just have not been able to replace him yet. We are working on a replacement newsletter, and we hope to have that rolled out as soon as possible. But unfortunately, we've been on newsletter hiatus. But we have flipped over to our Space A podcast, so hopefully folks have tuned into that and learned a little bit. Educate. We want to educate people about the value of space, how it's used, how it works, how satellites work. We are looking to do this through workshops, through working with student groups such as SEDS and the MSSA, and other various student groups around the country. Engage is to engage our members through space-related projects and activities, through networking opportunities, partly through things like the summit. And one of the highlights that we've got going on in the Engage department this year is the development of a payload challenge to go along with the Launch Canada University Launch Competition. So if you're not aware, there is a launch competition underway in Canada scheduled to occur in August of 2021. And we have taken the first steps towards putting together a payload challenge. So some small payload that will fit in the fairings of these student experimental rockets. Hopefully not too expensive, because you never know when a rocket goes boom. So certainly a nice way to engage and educate at the same time. We'll have more details on that as we develop them. And then finally, in shape, we want to be able to shape space policy, certainly to represent our memberships, to aggregate the voices of Canadians who want to see more space activity in Canada, want to support more space activity in Canada, and want to lend their opinions and experience and expertise to Canadian space policy questions. We'd like to kind of be a focusing lens for some of those activities. So the current board, after a few months of trying to live up to the goals of these four themes, realized that our volunteer base was not strong enough to get there. So our first big task and first big project was to increase the number of volunteers that we had, and to restructure the organization in a way that made for a functional flow up of information, created functional teams, and gave people a sense of understanding of what their roles were in the organization. So we built out a rather large org chart and started filling in. When we started this project, we had what we considered, what we counted to be about 7 more or less engaged volunteers, and that included the 5 board members. So really quite lean. We managed to pull in 25. You've met Hussein already. And we've really structured the organization along those 4 themes. So you can see the kind of color coding goes along with the inform, educate, engage, and shape lines. So there's a manager under each theme, and then a manager of sort of the operations level, and then the board and the governance kind of at the top of the org chart. So for those of you who haven't had much engagement with the Canadian Space Society, this is kind of how we've structured ourselves. You can see some names in there. We certainly are looking for other people and other volunteers to come and help us achieve the mission we're on. I think it's a fantastic opportunity. Like I said, I've been at it for about 10 years, and I don't regret a minute of it. My wife may tell me I should regret some more of it, but I've had a great time, met a lot of fantastic people. And really this last year with the team that has come into place, this team has met almost every week for a full year for at least a half an hour. That is a serious commitment. It's been a lot of time in meetings, even though we've tried to minimize it, half an hour times every week rather. But they have been putting in tons of extra effort to bring you things like the summit, the podcast. You may have been seeing a lot more activity on our social media. That is all part and parcel of the refresh and the refocusing of the Canadian Space Society over the last year and a half, 2 years. So there's more to come as we pull in more people and attract more volunteers. Hopefully some of you on this call. We will start rolling out more and more projects and furthering more and more of the ideas that we've got cooking up in the back to make things more exciting and more informative and more educational and more engaging in space for Canadians. Okay, one of those things is of course the Canadian Space Society's podcast, Space A. It's almost an elevator pitch, kind of about a 5-10 minute little podcast. So not too great an investment in time, focusing on Canadians who are doing really interesting and cool things in space. There are links to it. If you're following us on social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, you'll find links there. You'll find links on the website. Excellent. We're looking to continue this perpetually, I guess. And then looking to maybe do a deeper engagement with members based on the podcast star for that month. Maybe have the podcast as a bit of a teaser for a bit of a deeper dive for Canadian Space Society members later that month. So as Hussein mentioned in the beginning, I am also the president of Satellite Canada Innovation Network. I know that sometimes it's hard to separate the two because they are doing a lot of things that are very much aligned, very much overlapping. and very much in lockstep, especially when earlier on I was the one doing all of it. Thankfully, I'm not doing that anymore. I have a lot of great people doing a lot of the implementation of these programs now, so that's been fantastic. One of the major wins for the Canadian Space Society in the last couple of years was that we made successful proposals to Global Affairs Canada under their, it was called GOA, opportunities for associations, or whatever the acronym was. It's now Can Export, and the win was that the Canadian Space Society was granted money to support Canadian enterprises to get to the International Astronautical Congress and to support the development of a Canadian pavilion at the IAC, the International Astronautical Congress, in 2019, as part of aggregating the Canadian voice on the international stage. So the Canadian Space Society has been a member of the International Astronautical Federation that runs the IAC for several years, and the win with GAC was really a big step for CSS in terms of being able to apply for, win, and deliver government programs. CSS contracted SATCAN, and you can talk about whatever C of I's conflicts of interest you want there. It was SATCAN had the people in place and the bodies and the employees to be able to pull this off. So CSS employed SATCAN to actually do a lot of the implementation of those programs. So SATCAN helped with the pavilion, helped with the travel expenses for SMEs and whatnot. So in terms of Satellite Canada, some of the other things that it has been doing is a similar restructuring of its mandate, where it's going, and what it wants to do. For background, for people who are hearing about SATCAN for the first time, it was born out of a space and satellite-based supercluster. So at some point, the supercluster program came out. Myself and a few other, call us silly, call us excited, call us optimistic, whatever you want. We thought Canada needed a space supercluster, and we started beating the streets to shake out the industry and the ecosystem to see what we could get put together for a space or satellite supercluster. The response was overwhelming. The $328 million that industry and academia and government pledged to our supercluster application was about 3 times what we were hoping for. So we thought that was a pretty strong indicator that the industry was supportive of something along this lines. So we incorporated Satellite Canada. We obviously weren't as super as, or I didn't think we were as super as we did. So we weren't invited to create a cluster, but we have continued on with mini clusters, and have put together some other programs from different sources that are helping build and grow the Canadian space sector. One of these is the Space Support Program. This is an NRC IRAP program, so the National Research Council's Industrial Research Assistance Program. They have funding to help companies grow and scale up for under various different programs and guises. This is a contribution to Satellite Canada to support small and medium enterprises in terms of consulting services. So companies pay an administrative fee, and they then have access to consultants, typically on the strategic level, or the marketing level, or the sort of networking pre-sales type level, like market understanding and market awareness and ecosystem understanding. We can do some other things under there, but that's sort of typically where that program is driven towards. It is in its third year and has helped 30 to 40 companies each year so far. So that's been really helpful. Great feedback from companies on that. The other big news in SATCAN's arsenal is the Optical Satellite or SATCOM Consortium. This is another program with the National Research Council, not IRAP, but the HTSN, the High Throughput and Secure Networks Challenge Program. So the HTSN program is NRC's challenge to achieve gigabit per second internet connectivity to everybody everywhere in Canada. A very lofty goal, especially when they're considering that gigabit to be two ways rather than sort of a lopsided more down than up. You need that two-way connectivity to enable telecommunications like this, teleconferencing, video conferencing, and many other applications that are emerging. So the NRC approached Satellite Canada at the Canadian Space Summit in 2018 and asked for input and feedback on what SATCOM technologies might be of interest to pursue to achieve that kind of connectivity. Then we were asked, Satellite Canada was asked to stand as secretariat for the development of a consortium to conduct some advanced research and development programs in the optical SATCOM space. So the consortium was formed September last year. 14 signatories joined the consortium as founders, including MDA, NRC, Carleton, and McMaster University as sort of the top tier of the consortium leading the projects. And then several other organizations, companies, not-for-profits, and universities have also joined. And now we are starting to grow the consortium organization by organization as we go along. CSA has just joined on. So that's exciting to see this technology area being developed and done in a collaborative, cooperative way under this consortium. The projects involve space-to-ground links, space-to-space links, the various different frequencies within the optical band, and quantum key distribution technologies, and even sort of the quantum photonics and being able to generate and receive and understand quantum signals. Tremendous potential in the whole optical photonics SATCOM realm. The constellations that I had mentioned earlier all have some plans, at least, for optical intersatellite links. The amount of bandwidth potential is unlimited when you compare it to our current radio frequencies. So very exciting to be part of that. National Research Council is investing about $1 million a year in cash, and the consortium in total is where are we? Probably about $2 million in kind contributions from the various member organizations, depending on how many you're counting at the time. So that's exciting. Hopefully we'll put Canadian companies at the forefront for being able to sell their systems and components into the SATCOM world going forward. I mentioned the joint program with Canadian Space Society and SATCAN with the GAC CAN export funds. The International Astronautical Congress happened again this year, but it was also virtual. So CSS and SATCAN had a virtual Canada Pavilion. So this is the virtual Canada Pavilion from 2020. A very different affair, as I'm sure we're all going to experience over this week of a very different summit. But but helpful certainly in this day and age to make sure that Canada and Canadian companies stay stay relevant and stay on on the on the lips and minds of the other companies and countries in the world that are still looking to procure space and space systems. One of the twists this year in the CAN export program is because people can't travel, there's no travel grant. You know, in the past, it's been up to 75% of travel costs could be covered for SMEs traveling to the International Astronautical Congress. Without the ability to travel, CAN Export has allowed and approved us to change that into a digital media grant. So small and medium enterprises can apply to the grant, and similar to the travel grant, can get up to 75% of their digital media development costs covered. So if you want to do a podcast or a blog setup, or you know, a video virtual tour of your facility or something like that, you know, CSS and SATCAN are able to help provide that and help subsidize that for SMEs. The Canadian Space Directory. This is its second edition. We're up to 22 companies in this edition, and again, growing rapidly. This is intended as a one-stop shop for Canadian space and adjacent industries. Certainly, you know, if you have something to do in space, you have a job you want done, a product you want to buy, a service you need done, this is going to be the place to come to first. You know, call it the Sears catalog wish list for Christmas. It has spawned out of the IAC work, and should be a good reference for companies and individuals in government and academia going forward. Okay, I have covered now a lot of CSS, SATCAN, and what sort of SATCAN and CSS have done together. I want to touch on just a couple of other projects that I've been working on over the last couple of years in my private capacity. I think they're just really kind of neat and don't necessarily get as much attention as they may deserve. Current contract that I'm on is with Defense Research and Development Canada, the NEOSAT program. This is a follow-on program from the MOST satellite, a microsatellite with really high capabilities. NEOSAT was designed to take images of other satellites and take enough images to be able to reconstruct an orbit of that satellite, so that you know, A, where it is, and B, where it's going. It's almost a unique capability. Canada is certainly a pioneer in this area of space-based space situational awareness, with NEOSAT, and Sapphire is kind of the sister satellite to NEOSAT. They have both been operating for about 7 years, taking images of other satellites on orbit, taking images of space debris on orbit, taking images of asteroids, you know, natural satellites on orbit. Very, very exciting and very complex. One of my favorite images that popped out from this past year, you might remember the comet Neowise, kind of hit public consciousness for a little while it was visible in the sky. This is my favorite picture of Neowise. You can faintly make out the tail of the comet there, but certainly a picture of a comet taken by a satellite that you've been working on is pretty exciting to me. So I wanted to share that with everybody, that's a picture of a comet taken by a satellite on orbit. And Canada's best in the world at doing that right now. Right. The other Sorry, this one came out really fuzzy. But the other project that I've had the absolute honor to be part of is COSPAS SARSAT. Hussein mentioned it earlier on. COSPAS SARSAT started in about 1979. It was an agreement between Canada, France, USA, and at that point, the USSR. They all got together and decided that it was better to cooperate at the height of the Cold War in search and rescue efforts. And the SARSAT is search and rescue by satellite, SARSAT. And then COSPAS is the Russian version of that. And this is a system that, again, has been operating for almost 40 years, has saved countless numbers of lives. And how it operates is using a small constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit and a couple of satellites in geostationary orbit, or a few satellites, a number of satellites now in geostationary orbit. The beacons are carried by either individuals, so these personal locator beacons. The ELTs are aircraft beacons, and then there's maritime beacons as well. So ships, planes, and individuals can all have a different type of beacon. If you get into trouble, something happens, this beacon will emit a low power RF message beacon that is then picked up by the various LEO and GEO satellites. Those satellites then relay the signal to a LUT, a local user terminal, and Canada has 4 of these LUTs across the country. That signal is then interpreted. The location of the beacon is determined by the LUT, and that's passed to a mission control center, which then decides if the beacon is real and decides whether or not to deploy forces to go rescue people. They handle about 600 incidents a year across the system and save over 2,000 lives a year. And as a space ecosystem, I don't find we really talk about this one much, especially as a long-standing space program and an enormously amazing example of international collaboration, as I said, between Cold War enemies, USA and USSR, now Russia. Since the original inception in 1979, COSPAS SARSAT has, the agreement was formalized in 1988 with the 4 founders, and then a further 38 participants have joined since then. So the European Commission, several other countries, and a couple other organizations are involved now. So it is again a really exciting program and a highlight of international cooperation in a highly technical system. So all of these LUTs and mission control centers are now networked into each other, so that a beacon in one person's region can go to several participants' LUTs, and the message can get out to mission control centers, even if some of the nodes or some of the LUTs are down. So that's a really exciting system. And like I said, it has been LEO and GEO for the first 30 years or so. The LEO satellites are exceptionally good at locating. So what they use is the Doppler shift due to the relative speed of the beacon and the satellite. So the beacon is assumed to be stationary. The satellite is flying overhead at high velocity. You can use that velocity to determine where that beacon is, or at least on a circle after the first one, and then narrow it down after you get subsequent beacon hits. The trouble being is that they don't have global coverage. They don't have enough LEO satellites in the constellation to make sure that they're covering every square inch of the Earth at the same time. So that's where the GeoSAR satellites came in. So geo being much higher, you can see, sort of a third of the Earth all the time from a geosatellite. The trouble is that there's no relative motion because it's geostationary, so they can't get a position fix from a geosatellite. So geo, you catch every beacon in its field of view, but you don't get a location. LEO, you get a really good location, but you don't catch every one, and you can miss them. So the Cosmos StarSat International has decided to move to MEOSAR, and we're getting to the really relevant piece to Canada right now. So MEOSAR being medium Earth orbit, we're adding a lot more nodes in the Cosmos StarSat network to be able to get position and catch every beacon. So right now, the Galileo constellation is carrying the European version of the MEOSAR repeaters, and it's just going into early operational phases. Canada has procured 11 and has options for another 10 or so MEOSAR instruments to go on the next flight of the GPS constellation. So what this will do is the beacons will then be picked up by multiple MEO satellites at the same time, and in a kind of a reverse GPS, a little more complex than that, but close enough. Use a sort of that reverse GPS to pinpoint a position of that beacon on the ground. So should lead to a lot more saved lives. Again, Canada's been involved and invested in this for over 40 years. Fantastic program. The Department of National Defense is the implementer for Canada. Just super program, super use of space, and saves a lot of lives. Okay, that is the end of my little spiel today. Not sure how long I spoke for, but I can certainly feel my throat getting a little scratchy. I am happy to chit chat for a little while, talk a little bit more about CSS's plans for the next little while, talk about any of the missions or anything talked about there, or happy to thank you folks and welcome you to the Canadian Space Summit and let you go on your next break or whatever it is. Sane, how we doing? We got questions in there? Or?
No, I think we're pretty okay here in terms of questions. I don't have any questions that came up
Okay.
from our side. Zach asked a question here. Can you chat a bit about the process of building a space supercluster, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we started with was approaching the companies, asking them what sort of projects they would want to develop under a supercluster. We haven't quite given up on the idea of something similar-ish to that. Certainly the path to achieving it will be a little bit different. And we look at some of the other models in the rest of the world, and this pops to my mind. So in the UK, they have the Harwell Space Cluster that includes the Space Apps Catapult. So that has been a real magnet for UK companies, and even some Canadian companies have installed themselves there to take advantage of the concentration of space expertise and space companies in that whole ecosystem. I would certainly like to see something like that in Canada. Where that ends up, would depend on which sort of investment we get, which anchor tenants we'd get. but certainly would involve convincing the companies and those anchor companies, anchor organizations, that it is a worthwhile investment and will pay dividends in the end. And I'm seeing some good backfill on some of the stuff that I talked about. Some Neosat info in the chat and some Cospus Sarsat info in the chat.
Yeah, it seems like I am going to post the questions again. So if you folks have any questions, feel free to just click on the link and share it. We're monitoring those questions, and Ryan will be happy to answer any of them. Ryan, we've got a question from Warren. How does the consortium implementation work? For example, in terms of IP.
Good question, and that's probably what took us so long to get to get it up and running, to be honest. So there's a couple layers to the IP. One of the contributions from the National Research Council is their background IP and the IP that they develop under the consortium. So the NRC has granted so dial back one sec. The consortium is organized into 3 tiers. So there's level 1, level 2, and level 3. Level 1 is the highest engagement, and that's really project leads, or intended to be project leads, system leads, and really IP generators. Level 2 was intended to be maybe a subsystem lead, but more likely component packaging, manufacturing organizations, maybe generating a little bit of IP on their own, but not necessarily at the system level. And then the tier 3 are organizations that aren't developing IP directly, but perhaps have a stake in the whole ecosystem. So MyTax is a university internship funding organization. They are a level 3. The Canadian Space Agency comes in at a level 3. Just to kind of give you that background. But when it comes to the IP that NRC develops within the consortium, level 1s will get a royalty-free, license-free, non-transferable license to that IP. Level 2s will more or less get the same type of thing on a smaller scale, but with a few more catches and caveats here than you would if you're at level 1. And then level 3s won't get access to any of the IP. For projects, for IP for the companies, which is really everybody's concern in terms of the consortium members, all your background IP remains yours. You sort of grant license where needed to work on a project within the consortium. So if your project team needs access to your IP, you kind of have to let them have it to advance the project. But then all the arising IP within a project, we have put into the project agreement. So each project will have a project team come together, they'll develop the project agreement, and the IP terms for that project will be contained in that agreement. We did that just because there's so many different nuances and different values to different IP and different arrangements. It was impossible to make a blanket agreement. So we really put the IP onto the individual projects. And then there's each project has to have some sort of a level of sharing of what they're doing within the consortium and publicly. So there's kind of three windows, I guess. You know, the biggest window into the project will be the project members. The next window is the consortium, and then, you know, the public bit, because anything that's funded by public money has to have some sort of a public facing announcement and description of what they're doing. So, but it doesn't need to release any IP data on that public level or the consortium level.
Excellent. Ryan, we've got another question.
Okay.
So the question is, where do you see student organizations such as CEDS tie in with or contribute to CSS, educate and inform pillars?
Are you coming to the Space Leaders Roundtable? No, I see that as enormously important. And my grand vision for the space ecosystem, it includes kind of a conveyor belt of sorts. I'd like to see some sort of organization that a person could join or be part of from, toddlerhood right up to retirement. So all of that whole ecosystem, I think we need to build and develop. We need to develop the ties between all the organizations. So like CEDS and Space Generation Advisory Council and MSSA and all the other organizations that exist in Canada. I serve as an advisor to CEDS Canada. We have an MOU. The Canadian Space Society has an MOU with CEDS Canada. I love that organization. I think they have done a fantastic job of organizing themselves, developing great ideas and great projects, and executing on them. The contests that they run, the CAN RGX and CAN SBX, those are great competitions. Fantastic, and I think they're important. The other, loosely call it an organization, but the Canadian Satellite Design Challenge. I've been long a big fan of that program, and its founder Larry Reeves has had a great vision for what the university student level can benefit most from in terms of space. If you're not familiar with CSDC, that is on paper it's a competition where the winner would get a launch. The winning university designs and builds a 1 to 3U CubeSat, and the winner would get a launch. I think that is just a fantastic incubator program that the CSA has sort of picked up on too. There's the Canadian CubeSat program where they've funded 15 CubeSats across Canada, and they're going up on a launch sometime next year. Students are extremely important. I've said this in previous years too. I think it's important in terms of developing our capacity and developing the expertise and experience of those students too. When I was at Telesat last, and if you've heard it before, bear with me. When I was at Telesat last, I was talking to somebody from HR, and they told me that at that time, 80% of our staff was eligible for retirement within the next 5 years without penalty. 80%. So that was a really striking number. I've shared that story across several other of the larger Canadian space companies, and it has been the same there. So a really large cohort of people who got great jobs in the 80s and 90s and just stuck with them. And can't blame them. But what that's led to is a bit of a valley. So there's a bit of a demographic valley already, but now we've got an even deeper one within space where there was a lot of cutbacks and jobs cut back. At one point, Telesat had like 11,000 employees. The Canadian space sector right now employs less than 9,000. So that was more people at Telesat in the 90s than we have in the whole sector right now, which might be a little daunting for students going into the space sector right now. But the flip side is that there's a huge wave of retirements that are happening and going to happen in the next little while. where the CSDC and the CEDS competitions come in is giving students some practical education, some hands-on experience with satellite and satellite systems, so that they're a little bit better prepared for jumping into things when the vacuum happens and they're kind of swept up into Gateway and these LEO constellations and all the things that are happening in space. I saw North Star mentioned out there. There's a lot happening. So critical. And I mentioned the Space Leaders Roundtable. So it's the Space Leaders Roundtable are invited heads or representatives from a number of the organizations across Canada, CEDS being one, SSPI, Society of Satellite Professionals International, has a Canada chapter, Canadian Space Society, obviously, and other organizations around the country that make up the space ecosystem.
Excellent. I think so. That's about it from our side here, because it seems like no other questions have popped up, neither on Slido or in the chat.
Okay. Well, I note that Warren So says that I look like George Harrison. It's a running joke in my family that my dad looks like George Harrison. So that was what I was chuckling about a second ago. Anyways, just to sign off, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you all for registering for the Canadian Space Summit. As I said, Hussein has done a phenomenal job of pulling his team together and getting the program for you this week. Very excited to hear how things go, and excited to hopefully engage with some of you more in the future. I'm going to turn you back to Hussein, and he's going to let you know what's happening next.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you so much to Ryan for joining us. And so we have 15 minutes until our next session, folks. What I like to do is give you guys a little break for 15 minutes to get your coffees and come back and join us. We'll be back in our next session, which is about lunar exploration. So we'll be signing off here, and there'll be another link in Sketch that you can join. So speak to you soon. We hope you're having a great time, and we'll see you in the next panel.